there, and welcome to a quick lecture over web accessibility standards. A lot of these resources are pulled from w3.org, the WAI fundamentals. So the first principle that I want to talk about is doing text alternative for non-text elements. So you're familiar with putting in your HTML alt text. So let's talk about why that is important. Text alternatives are equivalents for non-text content. So examples include short equivalents for images, including icons, buttons, and graphics. So don't forget to do things that are not just the images, but also including your icons and your buttons and any other graphical information that somebody who may not be looking, may not be able to see, may be, in other words, visually impaired. They need to know what you have put out there. These also are a description of data represented on charts, diagrams, and illustrations, brief descriptions of non-text content such as audio and video files, and labels for form controls, input, and other user interface components. So let's break that down a little bit. If you're putting charts and data on your site, it's great to have that text equivalent there. So if I'm using a screen reader, it's going to read to me that data that is in that chart. If I've got any type of diagram or illustration, what is going on? If you closed your eyes and said, well, and you described to me what is going on in this image, in this chart, in this graphic, that's what you want to put in your text alternative. So somebody using a screen reader can get that information. It's also helpful to use this in things such as audio and video, so that way people can know without having to play that audio or video file what is on that audio or video. And then your labels for form controls. So if you have a form control where you need to type in name, don't just hide that form. You can have that as set as an SR only if you think it looks nicer, so set it to screen reader only, but having those labels always on your forms. That way if somebody's using a screen reader and they're tabbing through, they understand what they need to put into those forms. So text alternatives convey the purpose of an image or function to provide an equivalent user experience. For instance, an appropriate text alternative for a search button would be search rather than magnifying lens. So if you're using an icon, tell people not literally what it is, but what it is for. Your icon of a house is not the house. It could be return to home screen. Having these alt text things ensure that search engines see the images. So what we see here is a picture of shoes. What the search engine sees is what you put in that alt image. So it's also important to make sure that your images are saved as an appropriate name. If you have a picture of shoes, shoes.jpg is helpful for search engine optimizations, but I may want to put in an alt tag. I need to describe these shoes. What am I looking at? A picture of vintage shoes is great. I can say a picture of vintage Converse red shoes against a green background is even better. So right there, that is helpful and descriptive for somebody using a screen reader. It's also super helpful for search engines. So if I said, I'm really looking for a picture of like vintage red shoes on a green background, my goodness, all of a sudden that's very keyword rich, where I'm looking at red and shoes and green background and vintage. And if you're doing a name brand, if you're doing Converse, all of a sudden those are all things that a search engine's like, hey, I found all of these keywords, that is going to have your stuff pop up higher. If you just said alt shoes, that's not really helpful. That's one keyword as opposed to a bunch of keywords that a search engine can kind of latch onto when somebody's doing an image search and find your image. You also want to think about making captions and alt text work together. So if you're thinking about, yes, I'm going to put a caption for this image, I also want to make sure that the alt text works with it, that I'm not necessarily restating everything. If you think about somebody's experience on a screen reader, what can I make that's going to read all of that text as well as the alt text for them as well? Can I make that work in tandem so that I'm not just restating the same thing twice? Thinking about that from that user's perspective can really make and also, from a search engine's perspective, can make your site very rich and pop up very high in search engine optimization, as well as do very well in accessibility testing. So from the WCAG 2.0 guidelines, all non-text content that is presented to the user has a text alternative serves an equivalent purpose. So I've got my example here. Here's my calculator icon. A calculator, calculate the budget for buying a new house. So if you're using that, what is that icon for? That's not just calculator, done, alt, calculator icon. You know, you can have a little bit more description based on the use in your site. Example 2, an image on a website provides a link to a free newsletter. The image contains a text, free newsletter, get recipes, news, and more. Learn more. The alt text matches the text in the image. So you can do it that way too. Free newsletter, great. When we look at forms and form controls, you want to make sure that any of these input fields have the labels that go with them. It's super, super important for people using screen reader technology. It's also very important when people are tabbing and using their keyboard shortcuts to get through your forms that you're using that correct semantic HTML, so that way I understand that this is tied with this is tied with this. It's all good stuff all the way around to make sure that you're consistently doing it correctly. So example, I've got my label form name. There it says name right there. Input form name. And then I have my please enter your name as my placeholder text. That's great. Another example for my submit button. It says submit there. Submit button is an image. So therefore on this image one, I need to give it that name, submit this form, so that way it's read back to the user if it's an image and not styled as a button itself. Captions and other alternatives for multimedia. People who cannot hear audio or see video need alternatives. That is super important. Even if you can or cannot see or hear, you may be in a position where I can't turn the audio on for this video. I must be able to see captions while I have it on silent, or I'm in a place that's really, really loud. I can't hear that audio content. So people need some type of alternative to make sure that that experience is the same or equivalent for them. Examples of alternatives for audio and video include text transcripts and captions of audio content, such as recordings of people speaking. Always having that closed captioning is super important. Audio descriptions, which are narrations to describe important visual details in a video. So if you couldn't see the video and you could only listen to the audio, would you know what was going on? Having those descriptions available, so if somebody is walking, somebody is showing a picture or things like that, what's the picture of? Can you describe it? Can I see the actions that the people are doing, or can you tell me about the actions that people are doing in that video? Sign language interpretation of audio content, including relevant auditory experiences. So you can have a sign language interpretation as well. Well-written text transcripts containing the correct sequence of any auditory or visual information provide a basic level of accessibility and facilitate the production of captions and audio descriptions. So if you were to look at videos out there, you've seen tons of them places where they may have these captions that show up automatically when they start playing, or if you have it on mute, the captions automatically pop up. That is very compliant. So having that kind of closed captioning system, it's also very nice to have bookmarks so people can skip ahead, forward, and back, and they know what is bookmarked in your video file. So you've got these captions, you have timestamps. So an SMIL file has the layout of your presentation, the timeline of your presentation, and the source of multimedia elements. So having as much information that goes with your audio and video files as possible. It's not just a video that you put up. It has all these extra things, goes a long way as far as accessibility. And then having content that can be presented in different ways. In order for users to be able to change the presentation of content, it is necessary that headings, lists, tables, and other structures in the content are marked up properly. Having proper HTML markup goes a long, long way for accessibility. It goes very, very far. Sequences of information or instructions are independent of any presentation. Browsers and assistive technologies provide settings that customize the presentation. So if I tab through or use my keyboard, I can navigate your site in order and get through the things that I need to go. Acronym tags. If you are using acronyms within your site, you need to be sure that you're using those acronym tags. So for example, Pennsylvania, if I abbreviate it to being PA, or HTML, writing HTML, or sodium chloride, getting abbreviated to NaCl, what a screen reader without those would say when they run into them instead of Pennsylvania would be PA, HITML, and NACL. So then if I use these acronym tags, it's going to correctly say Pennsylvania, HTML, and sodium chloride. So these are super important, especially if you are using abbreviations for institutions, states, anything like that, to ensure that the screen reader is getting what it is supposed to get. Another rule is to have content that is easier to see and hear. Distinguishable content is easier to see and hear. This includes color is not used as the only way of conveying information or identifying content. Default foreground and background color combinations provide sufficient contrast. Text is resizable up to 200% without losing information using a standard browser. Images of text are resizable, replaced with actual text, or avoided where possible. Users can pause, stop, or adjust the volume of audio that is played on a website. And background audio is low or can be turned off to avoid interference or distraction. So let's unpack some of that. Color. If you are using color as the only way to convey information or identifying content, people who may be colorblind will not be able to understand that information. So if you only have like a red is stop, green is go, and I'm just clicking those red or green button, if you are red-green colorblind, you're not going to be able to tell what those buttons are. That's not conveying all the information. So you need to have some other visual clue, some other information. Ideally, if you were using red and green buttons, you would have stop and go written on them as well in nice HTML text, so that way people are able to use a screen reader to understand, this button means go, this button means stop. So default foreground and background color combinations provide sufficient contrast. You must have enough color contrast between colors that people can easily read it. A good rule is to just, if you're working on your sites, you're working on your project, sit back, roll back from your desk and say, if you can't read this from 5 feet away, if you start to lose that information, somebody else is going to lose that information just in regular viewing. You must have sufficient contrast in the colors to be able to see this. Text is resizable. So that way, if somebody is using, say, they can just hit that, +++ on their browser and they can enlarge their browser. This can be resized 200% without losing information. Test that on multiple browsers and say, is my site working when I zoom in on it? Yes or no. You can even add those buttons into your own site that says, hey, I can increase or decrease the size of my text. Images of text are resizable or avoided. Maybe there's a wonderful font that you like and you would like to use, but is not a web font. Well, that may mean that you need to go back to the drawing board and say, well, it's not a good web font, so can we find another web font that I can use? So that I am not just taking a picture of text and using it as my headlines all the time because I want that cool specific font. Maybe I can find a web font so I can set it in actual HTML. The one kind of loophole with this would be maybe your logo, because your logo is cool and specific. That could be that image. However, your logo should probably be resizable. So an SVG would be great because it can be resized and also is using all those good alt texts that we've talked about in the previous slides. Another one, users can pause, stop, or adjust the volume, making sure that if you put any video content, any moving content on your site, don't put autoplay on. That's not great for people. Sometimes people are at work and all of a sudden you hear that noise, you're like, oh God, what is playing in the background? Have controls on that video content so that it doesn't autoplay. I can pause it, I can stop it, I can adjust the volume, I can turn the volume off. that's just basic good HTML UI design. That way people can control what's on your site versus being bombarded as soon as they load your site, it just starts playing. Background audio is low. We don't see too many sites anymore that automatically has music playing with it, but they're still out there. You tend to want to avoid having background audio or music or sounds in general unless they're absolutely necessary. And when you have that kind of sound, people should be able to take control of it. Your user should be able to take control of any audio that is playing on your site. So meeting this requirement helps separate foreground, background, distinguishable information, including considerations for people who do not use assistive technologies and people who do. So we're talking about things with people with color blindness, who may, and anybody who may be using ear headphones when they're at work. Maybe they're out and about, like I said, in loud places. Having all these things can really help your user out. So let's look at some of the color blindness. So there's a lot of different types out there. And this is a nice simulation of so someone with regular vision, if you're red, green, color deficient, is going to look like this. Protanopia is going to look like this. Tritanope is going to look like this. And the very rare monochromancy. So don't always assume that people have necessarily perfect color vision. Even if you're a designer and you have a wonderful sense of color and color balance and how colors should look and work, not everybody is going to experience color in the way that you do. And some people don't experience color at all. There are people out there who only see in monochrome. So it is helpful. There are plenty of tools out there that you can simulate your site, your product, whatever you're designing, to see what somebody who has different types of color blindness see. And you can see, does this still work, or is now all of my information just gone? Low contrasting text versus high contrast. This is low contrast. If you step back, roll back 5 feet, this gets really hard to read. It gets hard to see. If the colors start to vibrate, this is much better. It's clear, it's easy to see. 10 feet back, I can still read the home, about, product, contact. That works much better. It's the same information, but just having nice contrasting text makes this a much more pleasant, easier to read experience. Again, looking at high contrast, good, very easy to read. Low contrast, bad. Making sure that people can read what's on your site. Even if you're thinking of working in tones, be very, very careful of working in a lot of different similar shades of the same color, because somebody with low vision, color blindness, may not be able to see it at all. Another rule is that functionality is available from a keyboard. Many people do not use the mouse and rely on the keyboard to interact with the web. This requires keyboard access to all functionality, including form controls, input, and other user interface components. Keyboard accessibility includes all functionality that is available by mouse is also available by keyboard. Keyboard focus does not get trapped in any part of the content, and browsers, authoring tools, and other tools provide keyboard support. So what this means is that if I'm browsing on the internet, I'm on your site, I can use my keyboard to get all the way through your site. There's a lot of people out there who don't use mouses at all and need to just use, and they know the keys and they know how to get through, so that I can tab through the links, I can go back, I can move with my arrows, and I don't get trapped anywhere in your site. So this is a nice example of sites that have already been programmed to say, hey, look how accessible we are. I can enlarge my text, I can shrink my text, and I can use arrows to navigate. I'm already instructing my user, yeah, go ahead and just tab through this site, and you can get all the way through. Users have enough time to read and use the content. Some people need more time than others to read and use the content. For instance, some people need more time to type text, understand instructions, operate controls, or to otherwise complete tasks on a website. Examples of providing enough time include providing mechanisms to stop, extend, or adjust time limits, except where necessary, pause, stop, or hide moving, blinking, or scrolling content, postpone or suppress interruptions, except where necessary, and re-authenticate when a session expires without losing data. So this is very important in thinking of things like secure websites. So if you're working on a secure product, such as a banking site or a ticket buying site, anything where time is of the essence, that, hey, if you haven't been working for a while, this is going to go ahead and log you out to make sure that your login credentials are not hacked. You can give that warning and say, hey, your session's about to expire. Are you done? You can log out or you can keep working. Having any of things like that where, hey, and knowing that, hey, you're on a clock rather than just being booted from the site, to know that, hey, you're about to time out. Can you extend it? Can I use this longer? Can you keep working on it? Also having the ability, so if you do have something that is moving or scrolling or in other ways working in the corners, a lot of times you'll see ads like this, that if I have a video ad that's popped up in the corner, that I can close it. If you imagine not being able to, I'm sure you've seen the ones where you have not been able to close those video ads that have popped up, and then you have to sit and wait, or just leave the site in general, that you have some amount of control over that. Content does not cause seizures. Content that flashes at certain rates or patterns can cause photosensitive reactions, including seizures. Flashing content is ideally avoided entirely or only used in a way that does not cause known risks. For examples, avoiding causing seizures and physical reactions do not include content that flashes at particular rates and patterns, warn users before flashing content is presented and provide alternatives, provide mechanisms to switch off animations unless they're essential. So if you have a flashing animation for whatever reason on your site, people need to be able to stop it. It is best to just avoid those flashing GIF type of banners or animations in general to ensure that it's not going to cause anybody a photosensitive reaction. And very importantly, users can easily navigate, find content, and determine where they are. Content that is well organized helps users to orient themselves and to navigate effectively. This includes pages have clear titles and are organized using descriptive section headings. There are more than one way to find relevant pages within a set of web pages. Users are informed about their current location within a set of related pages. There are ways to bypass blocks of content that are repeated on multiple pages. The keyboard focus is visible, and the focus order follows a meaningful sequence. And the purpose of a link is clear, ideally even when the link is viewed on its own. So these are all very important things. Having breadcrumbs is a wonderful way of letting people know where they are, so I can keep going back. I can see, hey, I'm here, 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 and here. So if I need to jump back a page, I need to jump back a section, I can. Having very nice sitemaps and your sitemaps set up with Google and your sitemaps.xml uploaded, so that way it's easy for an SEO to find where you are, where you're going, and everything is very well organized. Another regulation is that text is readable and understandable. So content authors need to ensure that text content is readable and understandable to the broadest audience possible, including when it is read aloud by text-to-speech. So this includes identifying the primary language of a web page, such as Arabic, Dutch, or Korean. So whenever you're starting out your HTML, you make sure that you define the language of your site. Identifying the language of text passages, phrases, or other parts of a web page. So if you are having different passages in different languages, making sure that you are identifying that as being in a different language, if that's something you're doing. Providing definitions for any unusual words, phrases, idioms, or abbreviations. So that way, if you're using an unusual word, a scientific term, you are giving a definition to that. And using the clearest and simplest language possible, or providing simplified versions. Meeting this requirement helps software, including assistive technology, to process text content correctly. For instance, this requirement helps software to read the content aloud, to generate page summaries, and to provide definitions for unusual words such as technical jargon. It also helps people who have difficulty understanding more complex sentences, phrases, and vocabulary. In particular, it helps people with different types of cognitive disabilities. So, having text that is readable and understandable is so key and critical. If you look at this wonderful world's worst website ever, it is so difficult to look at. It is hard to understand what is going on. It is hard to understand what is going where, how is my eyes going, and if I can't read it and I can't understand it, I don't know what to do. It becomes a complete content nightmare for your user. Imagine getting clicked over to this and you couldn't see it, you could just hear it through a screen reader. Oh my goodness, you would be so overwhelmed and sad. You'd be like, where have I gone? What am I doing? Don't do that to your user. Content appears and operates in predictable ways. Many people rely on predictable user interfaces and are disoriented or distracted by inconsistent appearance or behavior. Examples of making content more predictable include navigation mechanisms that are repeated on multiple pages, appear in the same place every time. That is so key and critical. Your navigation should not ever move or change. If somebody gets clicked into some subpage in your site, things haven't changed. It's still the same. They understand how they got there and they understand how to get back. User interface components that are repeated on web pages have the same labeling each time. Things aren't changing. And significant changes on a web page do not happen without the consent of the user. So nothing is changing, particularly if I go from the desktop site to a mobile site. Things are not dramatically changing unless I say, hey, yeah, I go ahead and hide this. Go ahead and change this. Meeting this requirement helps people to quickly learn the functionality and navigation mechanisms provided on a website and to operate them according to their specific needs and preferences. For instance, some people assign personalized shortcut keys to functions they frequently use to enhance keyboard navigation. Others memorize the step to reach certain pages or to complete a process on a website. Both rely on predictable and consistent functionality. So in this example from Zappos, I can see that the user has two pathways in primary navigation. I can look for stuff along here. I can look for stuff along the side. And if I have that information that, if I click into clothing, maybe this opens up, or shoes, men's shoes. Do I see dress shoes, sandals, sneakers? Can that chunk in that information that is very predictable? And this would appear on every single page that I go to. Users are helped to avoid and correct mistakes. Forms and other interaction can be confusing or difficult to use for many people, and as a result, they may be more likely to make mistakes. Examples of helping users to avoid and correct mistakes include descriptive instructions, error messages, and suggestions for correction, context-sensitive help for more complex functionality and interaction, and an opportunity to review, correct, and reverse submissions if necessary. All of this is very key and critical, especially if you have things like checkouts, if you're creating accounts for that specific site, that I understand, why am I creating an account? Do I have to have an account? Can I do a guest checkout? If I've made a mistake, can I get an error message, or does it just simply erase? Is there a suggestion for correction? Am I able to reset my password? Am I able to get a hint? All of those things are super important for your user. If they're checking out, can I review my cart before I buy something? I want to make sure everything's cool. I want to be able to ensure that I've reviewed, like, hey, where billing, shipping, all of the things relevant to my order before I submit it. And if I, need to, can I reverse submission? Is that fine? Can I clear the cart? Can I totally empty it? Is there a way that I can get back? Okay, oops, I made a mistake. Oops, I left something out. Can I backtrack one step? So allowing and meeting this requirement helps people who do not see or hear the content. They may recognize implicit relationships, sequences, and other cues. It also helps people who do not understand the functionality, are disoriented or confused, forget, or make mistakes using forms and interactions for any other reason. Having good form relationships, good semantic HTML, and clear instructions help all users use your site, like your site, and want to use it again. So, examples of this off of Dropbox. If I happen to delete something, oh no, what if I did it by mistake? I can undo that action. Or if you know that you are going to delete this, you cannot undo it, having that little pop-up that says, hey, just so you know, you're about to delete this. Are you sure? That type of UI helps people avoid making mistakes that may be very, very critical to them. Things like error tolerance. So can you program this so it's got will correct typos on the fly. Do you mean? Are you sure? Can find some error tolerance, or can find other things like searching for, if I only search for certain keywords, it's like, can I somehow program that in to say, hey, we don't have any things like that, but maybe you meant something like da 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 da. And that really comes more into the development side of your site. However, it's important to think about that when you are developing the front end to say, what on the back end can help my user with error tolerance? And the last principle of accessible design is that content is compatible with current and future user tools. Robust content is compatible with different browsers, assistive technologies, and other user agents. Example of how this can be done include ensuring markup can be reliably interpreted, for instance, by ensuring it's valid. So you can run this through an HTML validator. There's highly recommend going through the WCAG validators and just say, hey, is this valid? All my HTML, is it coming back with any errors? And then also doing usability testing. Are you testing this on your users? Are you testing it on different browsers? Are you testing it on different machines? Are you testing it with different screen readers or other assistive technologies? And how is it working? Simple basic user testing can help you find a plethora of issues before things go out into the market. So I can't stress enough user testing, testing on multiple devices, testing on multiple browsers, testing on multiple users to ensure that your products are compatible with the widest breadth of users out there. And then providing a name, role, and value for non-standard user interface components. So making sure buttons, those all have roles, but if you've done a non-standard, a custom interface component, you've given it names, roles, and values so that way browsers can understand it. Meeting this requirement helps maximize compatibility with current and future user agents, including assistive technologies. In particular, it enables assistive technologies to reliably process the content and to present or operate it in different ways. This includes non-standard scripted buttons, input fields, or other controls. So if we look at the design hierarchy of needs with a lens towards usable design, first of all, your site has to function, and it has to function well. It has to work, it has to meet basic functional needs in order to have any value to it at all. So a basic site that functions, it doesn't really have any aesthetics, doesn't have any reliability, very little usability. It's there, but it doesn't have a lot of value. If you have a functional site that is reliable, it's stable, it's consistent, it's got a little more value to it. Once you hit into usability, design is forgiving, easy to use. Now we're getting somewhere. It works, all the pages work, all the images work, it's stable, it's consistent, it's easy to use. Now we're getting there. It's proficient. It empowers people to do more and better. Now it's at a high level. I can now use this site. I can do the things that I came to do on this site. And then cap it all off with creative. I've made a beautiful site, innovative interactions. It's making me do more and better things. I can do all the things I want to do. I can do things maybe on this site that I hadn't thought of doing before or I've never done before. It's forgiving, it's easy to use, it's stable, it's consistent, and on the base, it works, and it always works. And it will work with past tools, it will work with future tools. And that is my design hierarchy of needs. So this is your basic intro to accessibility and accessible web design. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.